Well, welcome back, folks. After a long intermission, Rachel and I decided it was time to get back together and record another healing conversation. And I don't think we really decide these things, do we, in terms of when they happen and what we're going to talk about. Life sort of intervenes and gives us a nudge and says, or we find ourselves talking about something, you and I, in conversation, and then one of us has the idea, actually we should put this in the healing conversations. And that kind of happened this week, so we got on it and we decided to record this now. And really the catalyst for that, Rachel, was you sharing with me a little bit of a healing journey that you'd been on recently, since I last saw you a few weeks ago up in Scotland. And the theme that sort of emerged out of that, which may be the title for this, we're not sure yet, but it was something like when healing doesn't look and feel like healing.
That's it, yeah.
When it's kind of disguised or dressed up as something else, and yet on reflection, or maybe with the wisdom of hindsight, we get to see, oh, that was healing. That was actually a deeper level of healing than I was even aware of at the time. So that's kind of what came into our conversation and into our consciousness, and that's what we'd like to talk about today.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah. So one of the things that I guess this whole topic revolves around is something around shock and trauma then. And it might be useful to just start with defining our terms a bit. What we're looking at here is those things that come into our life often quite unexpectedly, or at least unwanted. You know, they've come in and we're not aware that we've asked for them. And in some way they destabilize the fabric of our life or our worldview or our sense of self. It's like we think we're going along a certain path on a certain trajectory to a certain destination, and then something happens that makes us swerve completely off course. We suddenly find ourselves going down a different route, and it can feel as if the entire fabric of our life has changed, and we're on a different landscape in different terrain, and we've somehow got to cope with that. We've somehow got to pick ourselves up and carry on. So the effect of this then is to push us into the unknown, and it can feel like it's happening without our say so, that it's happening to us. And what we want to do today is explore the possibility that it's happening for us. And this doesn't in any way mean that we are negating the impact of trauma and the distress of it. We're not saying that that isn't real. It absolutely is. But what we're saying is that there's more at play here. There's more on offer. And that shocking event that seems to change everything isn't a full stop. It isn't the end of the road. It's a fork in the road. It's the changing of direction. And whilst we don't always choose these things, they can have powerful gifts in them. And I think one of the things that I've come to see in my life is that the bigger the event and the bigger the impact it has on me, the bigger the gifts it comes with. But we can't always see those at first, especially when that feels like it's something tragic or distressing. We have a lot of ideas about what's going on, and a lot of fears coming up, and at first flush, at first sight, they are what are taking over our vision, and that's the lens through which we're seeing things. But that lens will clear, and we will start to see that we've entered new territory and new terrain, and that there's more on offer here.
Yeah, that's it. And it often is precipitated by something, like you said, like a traumatic event, something that comes out of the blue. But I just want to say also, it can be something that creeps up on us a little bit more gradually and in a more subtle way. And yet we find ourselves similarly at sea, so to speak. And we kind of don't know how that happened. we've lost our grounding, or as I think as Martin Shaw describes it this way, we've been troubled into a communication with a deeper aspect of ourselves. We get troubled into it because it's not something we would have invited in, as you say. It's something that we find ourselves up against and being thrust into and having to deal with. And initially that brings resistance usually. And it brings a desire to get back to normal because things seem to be going okay there until this happened. And it's only at a certain point, or if we kind of get ground down sufficiently, that we realize that resistance is not helpful. It's not what's required. That there's something else that's required that's a bit more of the nature of surrender and leaning into it, going with it, and participating in whatever it is that seems to be unfolding in a more intentional way or a voluntary way. And then something changes. What I've noticed is that as soon as we get wise to the fact that, there might be another way that I can relate to this experience, it's almost like something starts to open up, and we start to get a glimpse maybe of the possibility that there's healing in it, that it's purposeful, and that it's heading somewhere that we might not know, as you say, the destination, but we get a sense that it's not just a random occurrence. It's not just bad luck. It's not life doing it to me again, which is what it might look and feel like.
Yeah, and I think, you alluded to me having a recent experience which prompted us to have this conversation, and it may be a good opportunity to share that now. So about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was on what I thought was going to be a lovely adventure off in the middle of Scotland by myself on my bike. I had the day to go and explore. I'd mapped everything out. I knew where I was going. I had all my supplies and everything. I'd learned how to fix my bike if something went wrong. I was as well-resourced as I could be, and I set off on my journey, and I had about 4 or 5 hours of cycling ahead of me. And about an hour in, I was suddenly on the floor, knocked down. I'd had a crash that happened without me even realizing it was going to happen. And I was very badly winded, couldn't breathe for a bit, and was hurting all over. And what I noticed almost immediately was how quickly the healing process begins, how immediate that is. And I think we don't always realize that. We don't always recognize that comes in the moment we are hurt, whether it's psychologically hurt or, as in my case, physically hurt. And what it felt like was the armed forces came in to my being and started to check the perimeter, see where I was, how I was, what was going on. It was like I could see this hyper alert, responsive thinking going on that was just taking in all aspects. And whilst it seemed very on guard, I could also see the purpose of it. I could see the kindness in it. At the same time, the blood was rushing to those areas that were hurting, and my body was already immediately starting this healing process. And there was a part of me that was just watching this in awe and in respect for the fact that this is how life works, that this is what happens to us the moment we are in any kind of difficulty. We have our consciousness rushing to our rescue, and we have our body immediately starting its healing process. And somehow I knew to just be very still for a few minutes, to just wait and let myself kind of come back in and settle down. And initially it felt like everything hurt. So I waited for that first wave to go, and then to see what actually was going on. And I could feel that my ribs and my chest was hurting, and my hand was hurting, and both of them quite badly. So I just rested for a bit and considered my options. And as I thought about, well, do I want to go back or do I want to continue? Knowing that I was only an hour in, I could quite easily get back. Most of it was downhill. But I had this sense that the path ahead, the path of going on, was brighter. it felt energetically more resonant for me. And I decided to trust that. And I really was going to be going out into the unknown, and I really was going to be totally by myself. But something in me told me that I was going to be all right and I was going to have a lovely day. And so I continued, and I had my ride, and I had an amazing time, and I didn't see a soul. And I felt completely okay. Now, I've never done that before. It is not my habit to ride off into the middle of Scotland by myself. So what was at play there? You know, what was it in there that was guiding me and helping me to navigate that scenario? And to know that I wasn't being foolhardy. I'm not a reckless person, you know, but this just felt right. And then because I was doing so well, I mean, I was in some pain. I actually saw Ian the next day. Ian was teaching in the area, which was one of the reasons I was up there, and kindly gave me some homeopathic remedies to sort of see me through that first 24 hours. But I didn't at that point think anything was broken. And I didn't know until about 10 days later, when suddenly my body kind of contracted into the healing as my bones started to knit and the deeper muscle started to repair. Suddenly my body said, I can't move. And everything went into spasm, and I literally was immobilized for a few hours. And then after that, it took about 10 days before I could really start to walk again. And there were times during that next period of the healing process where, because I was so immobilized and there was so little I could do, and Brian, my husband, was off working and it was busy, and we were actually meant to be on holiday. It was our holiday time. There were times when I suddenly got quite low and felt quite caged and lonely and a bit self-pitying probably. But also I had quite a lot of insecurity come up about feeling that I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't doing anything, that I wasn't contributing. And I want, you know, part of me wanted to just distract myself and go and do something, read a book or watch a movie, or just kind of pick up my spirits in that way. And on this occasion, it didn't feel right to do that. And instead, what felt right was to just know that I was in the storm of something, that there was some kind of whisking off of an old pain that was happening here, that maybe not just my bones were healing, but that something else was healing, that an old insecurity had come up for me to face it at a time when I couldn't actually get away from it. I couldn't wriggle out of it. I couldn't distract myself with a load of doing. And so I just stayed, and I was very gentle with myself in that vulnerable space. That was all I could do. And that happened 2 or 3 times. I had kind of 2 or 3 waves of that. And then suddenly, I think it was about 4.5 weeks after. So I'm coming up to 5 weeks tomorrow. So it was about 4.5 weeks after, just a few days ago, I suddenly woke up and it had all gone. But it felt like this layer, this deep, deep layer that had been there in me of old pain and old hurt and old insecurity had gone as well, that I'd been through a deeper journey, that I'd been invited to experience a healing that was more than apparently the flesh and bone level of healing. And I hadn't expected that. And I felt so light and clean. I felt like a shadow has gone from me that I didn't really know was there, and that it's fallen away. And I feel life feels simpler, and I feel cleaner, and I feel more secure in my being than I've ever felt. As if there's a new structure that's has been built in this time of renewal. And that feels very precious and very special. And I'm reminded of times in the past when I've experienced a grief and it's brought back old griefs, that it's been a time when it's been possible to go deeper into the healing of those old griefs as that new grief has come in. And there's something about this experience has been similar to that, that we think we are dealing with this thing in this here and now, but we are in this moment of now, we're everything, we're every part of ourselves that we've ever been and ever will be. It's all here now. There's nothing that can't be touched by the present. So any healing is a healing, and we can let that go as deep as it wants to go, as deep as we will allow it to go. And for me, the learning was that this is about surrendering and trusting the process, and knowing that it's incredibly unusual for me these days to have those kind of insecure feelings, and that for that to come in, then there was a purpose to that, there was wisdom in that, and that maybe rather than get caught in the content, I could just allow that process to come through, not think that it was something wrong with me, but consider the possibility that it was happening for me, that it was happening in order to let me let go of that as well. Whilst you're doing this healing, how about you do that at the same time?
Yeah. And you made the remark when we were speaking earlier that it's not a path to healing that you would have chosen. And that's usually the case. We wouldn't have chosen these things voluntarily. And yet, with enough perspective, you start to see the value in it and the richness in it. And there might even be more still to see that only unfolds with time. And it's so interesting, isn't it, how something that appears to be primarily or totally physical initially, it's like it's a physical accident, it's an injury, and we know that there can be kind of a psychic shock that goes with that, but then you feel like you're through that after the initial trauma experience. But what we don't often register is that, and it's something that I learned to pay attention to because I just saw it in different forms, is that whenever we have something going on physically, which in some way inhibits us or it stops us from doing what we normally would be doing or something like that, what I've noticed is that activates something of the individual. Something, it will be different for each of us in a given moment. And as you were speaking there, you were saying it touched something of a kind of insecurity. It had to do with an unworthy feeling, or which was kind of familiar, but you sort of thought you were over that, So hadn't visited that one for a while. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I recognize this. And as you were saying that, it was reminding me of a time when I was really ill with a chest infection, and it was probably pneumonia, but I just couldn't get over it. And I was trying the usual things to get better, and people were also treating me and trying to help me. And I remember there was a certain moment when I just realized I just felt helpless. There was this deep helplessness that I was resisting like crazy, because it's not a feeling that you want to feel, right? It's like I want to feel functional and able and capable, and I don't want to feel helpless. And yet I realized that was the truth of the experience, was that there was this sense of just being, there's nothing you can do here. There's nothing you can do. Surrender to that. And at a certain point, I remember just kind of getting the message. It's like, okay. And that was when the healing kind of really kicked in. And I would call it the deeper level of healing. I mean, I was doing some other things that were helping me, but that was the turning point. And I remember it quite distinctly. It was when I allowed myself to feel that deeper experience of being helpless. It was like almost like a baby, you're completely dependent on some force that's other than yourself, and there ain't nothing you can do except accept and put yourself in the hands of that, whatever that is. It requires a certain kind of trust. And it's true what you say, is that often what seems to be happening is that we're touching a deeper level of something that we've spiraled around maybe numerous times before, and possibly feeling like we've dealt with that one. We've worked that one through, and sometimes not. Sometimes it puts us in touch with something that we didn't even know was there. I think it can go that way as well.
Yeah. I love the point that you're making about surrender. I think that's crucial. I think that's one of the things that can be hard about a traumatic event, or whether it's a sudden one, or as you say, something that's creeping up. The sense of wrongness, the sense that this shouldn't be happening, that this isn't what we expect or we thought was going to happen next in our lives, or it isn't what we want. It's not in the script that we've written for ourselves. And that's one of the most painful parts of it, I think. And I think for me in this experience, just as for you in that, the fact that level of surrender actually made it easier. And in some ways, even there was even a sweetness to it. There was even a poignancy to what was happening. There was it didn't feel antagonistic to me. It felt like, this is okay. This is the next thing to happen. This is what's happening in this moment. There is nothing else now that could have happened, and you've just got to follow that path and see where that leads. This is where you are now, and there's no point fighting with that. And that puts us in a position to be able to then receive it.
Yeah, that's it. It's all has to do with the receptivity.
Yeah.
Which is not something we can force, but it's something that we can notice when it comes into our awareness that we're resisting, that we've been kind of pushing back against this that seems to be happening. Once that kind of arises in our consciousness, then we can see that there's something else that we could be doing instead. We could let go. We could go with it and see what happens in that direction. It's also I was listening recently to a podcast of a friend and colleague of ours, Paula Latimer, who we both know as a homeopathic colleague, and she was describing, she was sharing her experience as a mom with a son who was born quite severely autistic, with a lot of health challenges and behavioral challenges and all kinds of things. And she was advised not to have even, to have kept him when he was in her womb, but she did. And all along it was kind of a journey of her listening in and following her own instincts and kind of going against a lot of what she was being told. And it was bloody difficult. It was a very, very difficult journey, but she kind of navigated her way through it. And as a result of it, she became a homeopath who specializes in working with children and families with these, kind of issues, and has become really good at it and developed a reputation for that. And she mentioned that her son, when he was about 19, he'd kind of got into sort of a depressed state and feeling worthless, and maybe he shouldn't be here. And it was, caused such a lot of trouble in life and this kind of thing, which he shared with her. And she was able to say to him, well, but look what I'm doing. Look at the work that I'm doing now. It's all because of you. I would never have even got on this path if you hadn't have come into my life with the challenges that you brought in. That's what set me on the whole journey as a parent and learning about all of these things. I had to do it because you required, you brought that out of me. And now look at all the people that I'm able to help as a result of you, of the fact that you're here and that you brought what you brought into this world. And she just offered him that perspective, which he was able to kind of like, oh, well, I hadn't thought of it that way. and to me, it was just a beautiful example of like, we don't know, we have no idea what the ripples of what we think might even be an individual healing journey. Maybe not. Sometimes it's a ripple that's going out into our family or towards a loved one. There might be more healing in it for them than there is for us that we can't see at the time. When someone's suddenly required to stop everything that they're doing and going into the caring mode, we can resist that as well, right? But that's also something that we tend not to want. We don't invite that in typically. It's just something that we find ourselves. It's like, oh, there's no one else here to do it. I'm going to have to do it. And again, it's like, geez, what does this mean? It completely turns your life plan upside down. And we can fight and resist, and we can have a horrible time. Or at a certain point, it can occur to us that there's something happening here. that in this what might turn out to be a role reversal, or you're finding yourself in a role that you've never been in before, that actually there's growth in that, there's healing in that, and often there's more than one party involved in this journey.
Yeah, I love that, and great example as well. It reminds me of I've been reading Mara Gleason's book, excuse me, One Thought Changes Everything. And
on my desk right here.
On my desk, right? I've had it on my bookshelf for ages. And then during my convalescence time, I thought, oh, I really want to read that. I've been wanting to read it for such a long time.
I'm out for a long time, but for some reason it came out this week.
Right. And I'm not going to spoil it for anyone because I actually think you should go and read it. But there's an incident in there that Mara talks about where she where someone tries to mug her, and with quite nasty intentions towards her as well. And she has a response in that moment that is not what you would expect someone to have in those kind of circumstances. And I think that's the other thing, that we actually have quite ingrained set preconceptions about what certain events might mean. We have cultural and personal ways of seeing things which color the way that we relate to something that's coming at us, where we contract down thinking this is going to be something terrible without actually knowing really what it is. We don't know the fullness of what it is in the context that we're speaking about it here, in the sense that really what's coming at us is a spiritual event. And there is so much more on offer in terms of our own growth, our own evolution, our own potential to come outside the safe confines of the life we are in and step into something else entirely, which may for a time feel very challenging. So there's this sense that we are, I think for me, I find it very comforting to remember that I don't know what this is. I only think I know. It will look like a certain thing because of the movies I've seen, the ways that I've seen other people reacting to similar events, or whatever it might be, my own experiences, my own history. But this thing here now is fresh. It's unscripted. It's not any of those things. And I am alive and responsive to that in the moment in a fresh way. I have never been the person I am today before now. And who I am is ably, capably here to respond to this from a deeper place in my being, and I will be guided. And my whole being is coming into responsiveness with this immediately. So we're not just there having this impact, this distressing, disturbing thing coming at us. We are here in co-creation as we are in any given moment in our life. And what's happening is energetic. And our energetic response means that we can respond to this from fear, and we may well do that, and we may well need to go through that, and that is fine. But that's not all we've got. And there will be a way of being with this that we may come in and out of, as I have done on the last few weeks, but where we glimpse this from a bigger perspective, from a clearer, higher level, you might say. And we start to see, well, what is this about? What is the potential here? What is on offer here? What has had to fall away and what is coming in? And what does that bring out in me that I wouldn't otherwise be experiencing or expressing?
Yeah, I love that. It's that kind of broadening out, isn't it? And that seeing beyond the whatever your mind comes up with, as you say, as a kind of first reaction or an habitual way of thinking about something. We've got to be able to see beyond that. And often it's helpful just to keep in mind the notion that whatever meaning I'm making of this is not the whole picture. It's like this probably doesn't mean what I think it means. If we could just hold that in mind, at the critical moments. Because it's the meaning that we make of something that, in a sense, boxes us in. As soon as we decide that this is bad, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, or it means I'm worthless, or I'm, whatever we're adding to the experience through thought, really, it's just, we're literally making that up, and yet it feels real.
Yeah.
And it's being able to see beyond that, just to let that, to hold it lightly enough so that we can let some other possibility come in. Well, what if I didn't know what it means? Like you're saying, if we enter into the unknown, then we can discover something new.
Yeah, and knowing that how we're seeing it isn't static either, that we're
Right.
not just going to stay in this seeing of it, but that this is an evolutionary process, that this thing, this experience, this circumstances, it's unfolding, and we're going to unfold with that, and parts of ourselves are going to be revealed and returned to us through this. We're going to have a deeper connection with ourselves as a result of this, and that we're embarking on a journey here, and we really do need to surrender to that and allow that journey to take us to some extent.
Yeah. Yeah, just as an example there of around the theme of meaning, I've noticed when people are going through, and myself also, this kind of what we're describing, it's a kind of death rebirth cycle, really. So it's a letting go of something, and then an opening into something else, and then a kind of coming back in a new form. And what often arises in consciousness are thoughts and images of death as a kind of psychological accompaniment to that process. Our psyche alerts us to the fact, sometimes ahead of time. I've known some people where they started to get dreams of death or thoughts and images of death before they were plunged into such a journey. But sometimes it can happen during. And because of our kind of cultural norms and associations, having thoughts and images of death tends to be something that we're frightened of, and that we think it means that, oh, I'm suicidal, and that's a bad thing, and I need to be, I need to be talked out of that, or something along those lines. But what if it didn't mean that? What if it's just the psyche's way of alerting us to the fact that there's something that's ready to die, to be let go of, that some old form has completed itself and is ready to be surrendered? Then we have a totally different relationship to the same thing that's showing up. You realize, oh, that's nothing to be frightened of. I mean, you might still feel fear, but you can relate to it in a way which is not so frightening, because you can know that it doesn't mean that kind of that very narrow interpretation that you're giving it. Potentially, it means something beautiful is unfolding. This is like the caterpillar going into the chrysalis. That's what it's signaling. Well, what's the end result of that? Some beautiful butterfly, which you can't see yet.
Yeah.
But you got to go in the chrysalis first. So that to me is an example which I've seen many times, where people get frightened of what's arising in their own emotional space or in their psyche, and it's just the meaning and the thinking that we're adding to it that's frightening us, or the associations that we have with that. And if we recognize the wisdom behind it, there's an intelligence at work always, then something in us can connect back to that wisdom and that intelligence, and we just trust it again. It's like, oh, well, this seems to be what's happening. It must be the right thing, because this intelligence knows what it's up to.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that point in. And there's something as well around you hear so often of people who've been through something that we would term tragic, or maybe a life-threatening illness, or the unexpected loss of someone. And without the shadow of a doubt, it's been horrific at times for them on that journey. But somehow the life that has then started to emerge out of the ashes of that, the new version of events that comes eventually down the line, has proved to be very, very beautiful. And that, I know people who have looked back and said, well, actually, that was the most profound thing that's ever happened to me. And whilst I wouldn't have asked for it, it has changed me and changed my life, and I'm more me and more deeply settled in myself and have a more amazing life now as a result of it. And it reminds me that the way that something looks when it's coming at us, and indeed is here and in our space and right by us, is very different from how it will look in the rearview mirror. And we don't know what it will become in our life and what it will open and signify and release and reveal. But it will be revelatory, and it will be always imbued with wisdom. And there will be such depth and beauty in there for us. And there are times when the only thing we can do is just trust that and allow for that and open to that and surrender to that. But in doing that, we make ourselves available to receive something more from it than just the suffering.
Yeah, so that's our theme for today, which it's a beautiful theme, and it's a rich theme, isn't it? And there's probably many other facets to it that we haven't touched on, but I feel that's maybe a good place to draw it to a close. We hope that you hear something in that that's helpful to you, whatever stage you're at. If you're in something right now that's very much in your face, and maybe this might not be so helpful at this point, but just to know this in a kind of background way, to know that, as Rachel said, how it looks and feels right now is not how it's always going to look and feel. To know that this is temporary, and that there's a bigger story playing out here, which you're only on the first chapter probably, and we can't see where it's leading towards. But sometime down the line, you'll look back and think, well, my God, yeah, I don't know how all of that came about, but here I am, and what a journey it's been.
And I think also to be gentle with yourself in this space, as you said, Ian, you really had to let yourself acknowledge how vulnerable you felt, and I absolutely felt that as well, and have felt that at other times when I've been in shock, that the moment I just let myself be exactly as I am and don't try and be somewhere else or something else, just really be true to my own response, then it's like the healing cycle can then just work its way through us. We can be taken on this journey quite gently, but if we're trying to resist it and pretend it isn't what it is, or get over it too quickly, or hold on to it too tightly, or any of those kind of things, we make it harder for ourselves. So be very gentle and be loving with yourself, and open to the possibility that you can go through this tenderly.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll no doubt come back with another healing conversation soon.
Bye, everyone.